start out tonight by apologizing because our current reform environment is the direct descendant of No Child Left Behind, and No Child Left Behind is the direct descendant of an accountability system that was put in place in Texas many years ago. So we have Texas to thank for what we're faced with today. Texas is a pioneer of over-testing, of the misuse of test results, and so I apologize for that. But I have good news, and I'll start out with the good news. There's been such strenuous pushback in Texas from teachers, from parents, from a group of moms that have been dubbed Mothers Against Drug Testing. They were actually labeled that by the state education commissioner just before he spoke out against over-testing and then lost his job. The pushback has come even from industry. A group of industry, an umbrella organization of industry organizations came out and said, we're going in the wrong direction in education. And they were critiquing this accountability system that we have. And so I want to talk today about a bait and switch. Because the accountability system was offered to the nation with the promise of improving education for all children. Who's against that? Nobody's against that. But what we've done is we have used these test results that are not reliable, that are not valid, to drive an agenda that is destructive to the promise of public education. It's a bait and switch. And so now we talk about the importance of having a quality teacher in every classroom and the importance of having quality curriculum in every classroom. No one opposes those things. But when you say that's all it takes to cure poverty, you're ignoring very important things that need to change in our country. When you talk about the limited equity argument of improving curriculum and improving teaching, you're ignoring the expansive equity needs that our nation faces. And so when teachers, superintendents, speak up and say, it's poverty. Poverty is keeping us from doing our job. The immediate response to that is, stop making excuses. But that line is an excuse. It's an excuse not to talk about serious problems that we face. So tonight I'm here to talk to you about the promise. There is a public school that's funded by the people and accountable to the people anywhere you go in this country. There's not a square inch of land in the United States where there is not a public school that is required to serve the children of that community. This is no accident. This is by design. This is a promise that we made to future generations, but the promise is under siege. There's a concentrated effort today to shatter that promise, and it's become a mainstream movement supported by America's richest individuals and corporations, by foundations and think tanks that they sponsor, and by influential politicians in both parties that the same billionaires also sponsor. Other than educators, people like you and me and Karen, advocates who are standing up for public education across the nation, other than that, there's nothing standing in the way of this movement. A tomorrow dominated by for-profit chains of schools that educate the kids they want to educate and leave the public school system drained of its strongest students, drained of its funding, drained of its vitality. And this public education system, it's the greatest and most noble and most democratizing structure we've ever built in this country. It's under attack. The public school system is where the wealth of this nation is translated into action that serves the greater good, action that constructs the nation's future by making strong boys and girls who are equipped to be free and thoughtful citizens, not career ready, not college ready, but life ready. Life ready and capable of self-government, wise enough and critical enough that they won't fall for tyranny. That's what the public education system is supposed to do. If you read our state constitutions, you see that that was the intent. That's why we built a public education system. And it's under attack. The public school system reveals the American heart. This system is us in action. And I don't mean us as teachers, I mean us as a people. The public education system is where we come together as voters and citizens and where we make decisions to either do right or do wrong. It's where the rubber meets the road. And we're charged with investing in maintaining schools for our kids, for all kids. We're charged with sharing America's wealth with one another. Because as Abraham Lincoln said, a house divided can't stand. We're charged with caring and loving across our internal boundary lines, across our color lines and our language lines and our culture lines. Because public education is made of and by and for the public. It can never be any better or worse than we are. And so if our schools are sick, it's not the teachers. It's us. All of us. The voters, the citizens, the politicians. The public school is where it all comes together and it works or it doesn't. If our schools are sick, it's because our society is sick. And if our schools are well, it's because we're doing something right. So I don't stand before you today and pretend there are no challenges in our public schools. I won't claim that public schools serve their students equally well in every neighborhood in the country. They don't. But I will contend today and tomorrow and forever that the best thing for every American student, from those in high-performing, high-funded suburban schools to those in rural schools like mine that are struggling to pay the bills, to those in urban schools struggling to overcome the pernicious ravages of concentrated poverty and inequity that teachers did not create, I contend that the best thing for American students in each one of those contexts is the continuation and the preservation and the strengthening of the promise of public education. So the promise is worth fighting for. We have to fight for the promise of public education. I believe that teachers and parents and students who raise their voices and stand up, just as the teachers in Chicago have done, I believe that these people and their risks and their sacrifices are inspirational and heroic. And I believe they aren't fighting for themselves. They're not fighting for their schools. They're not even really fighting for their students. They're fighting for something greater. They're fighting to keep the fading light of American democracy burning, to fend off a generation of robber barons whom the politicians are afraid to enrage, but I'm not, and she's not, and I hope you're not. Those of us standing up for public education are fighting bravely to preserve this promise, not just of public education, but of public trusts in general, to extend these promises to all citizens, as we said we would do when we made the promises in the first place. And so when we give up on the promise, as we are urged today to do, then what do we claim? When we say public education doesn't work, so let's move to a free market system. We surrender our elected school boards. We surrender our constitutional guarantees. Who do we go to with our grievances? Do we march into the boardroom of a charter management organization or some foundation? You see, school reform as it is presented today is only backed by the assurances and sweet words of unelected, unaccountable spokespeople. But the public education system is backed by the full faith and credit of the people of your state and my state. When public education fails to deliver, we can seek redress. We can seek it at the ballot box. We can seek it through the court system, as we have been doing and will continue to do until the promises are kept. Public education is a trust fund. It belongs to us. It belongs to our kids. It's our nest egg. It's our hope. And nobody else can have it. They can't take it away without a fight. Because we love our kids more than they love their portfolios. And as fierce as they are, we will be fiercer. But we have to do one thing, and this is very important, to fulfill the promise of public education. We have to learn to love all kids like we love our own. To love kids in cities we'll never visit, kids whose names and cultures and traditions may differ from ours. We have to love them enough to fight for them just as fiercely as we fight for our own children. Public education has come under attack because we didn't keep our promise to all children. But we have to do that. We have to love them enough so that those who enjoy ample school funding levels will insist that schools in other neighborhoods and poor neighborhoods be funded just as well, or be funded even better so that those children might scale Maslow's hierarchy and meet the prerequisites of learning. Because they're Americans just like us. And together we depend on America. We depend on each other. School funding inequity, and I don't know if it's a problem here, but it's a problem in my state, it has to stop. Because their weakness is not my strength, and their poverty is not my wealth, and their pain is not my comfort. Their strength is my strength, their richness is my richness, and their well-being is my well-being. We are in this together, and public schools are for all of us. The people made a promise, and us as advocates for public education must insist that they keep the promise that they made. Alabama's Constitution says the legislature shall establish, organize, and maintain a liberal system of public education throughout the state for the benefit of the children. It doesn't say anything about choice. It doesn't say anything about charter schools. It says a system of public education for the benefit of the children, all children. Arkansas says that intelligence and virtue are safeguards of liberty and the bulwark of a free and good government. Colorado says the state has to provide a thorough and uniform system of free public schools open to all residents. These are the promises. And we have two choices today. We can demand that they be kept, or we can walk away from them. Don't walk away from these promises. Our ancestors were brave enough to make them. We have to be brave enough to fight for them and to keep them. We're being told to give up on getting our states to do what they said they'd do so many years ago. We're being urged to turn instead to free markets and corporations to deliver the kind of education our kids deserve. This is a foolish trade. Free market schools are under no obligation to serve all children. The data show that charter chains and voucher schools don't serve all children. Competition, we are told, will breed excellence, but it doesn't. If it did, our fast food restaurants would serve the healthiest food around. Competition breeds marketing. Competition breeds cost cutting. It breeds the desperate search for any and all competitive advantages, and that is not the environment our children need to learn in. This ethic is toxic to education. You can look at the for-profit colleges perpetrating scams on our veterans. And we already see examples of that happening in the for-profit K-12 education industry. Competition-based school reform doesn't and won't live up to the mythology that says all schools will rise as they compete for kids. We see marketing to sing these schools' praises. We see selectively published data that creates the appearance of a rich education. We see expulsions and attrition, intimidating parent agreements to rid their rosters of students most likely to struggle on state tests. And one of their most vocal advocates said it best when challenged about the number of kids leaving his school before they graduate, even though he claims a 100% college-going rate among his graduates. The attrition rate is huge. And when confronted about that, this advocate for this school reform movement said this: some kids just aren't the right fit. And so I'm here tonight for one reason. I'm a dad, and I love my kids, and I love my country, and I love my state of Texas, and that's probably a dangerous thing to say right here. I'm wearing my cowboy boots. I'm here for one reason, because I repudiate that notion with everything that is within me. Some kids aren't the right fit. Some kids aren't the right fit. They live here. They grow up here. They belong here. They are our children. Every kid is the right fit in the public school in the United States of America. And anyone who says otherwise is selling something, and it's not a good something that they're selling. Anytime you hear somebody say some kids aren't the right fit, that's not the schooling that we need in this country. We need to provide schools for all of our children. And that's one of the things I'm most proud of, being a public school educator. We say send them to us. Every one of them. If they're poor, if they're disabled, we want them, we will educate them. I don't care what it does to my data. I will take care of kids. Otherwise, I'm in the wrong business. How dare anyone shake children out of their schools like so many dust particles? How dare the powers that be in our nation lift up a model of schooling that excludes any kid who needs and wants an education? And how dare they possess the temerity to call these exclusionary principles the civil rights issue of our time? I'm here speaking because I love my country and I love my kids. And I care about the future. Anything that weakens public schools in this nation weakens the nation. Our future depends upon our commitment to children more than anything else, and that commitment must extend to all children, not just a select few who win a lottery. A system of selective and exclusionary schools spanning from coast to coast and competing for kids is not what we promised in the first place. It's a lesser promise, and maybe today we're a lesser people with lesser ideals. Maybe we've given up on an optimism that our forefathers had, an optimism that insisted that we had it in ourselves to create a society that was fair to all and would ensure that our children's tomorrows were richer and happier and more just than our own yesterdays. Now, I realize we made those promises and we did not deliver those promises to all children. And because of that failure on our part in our history, we allowed an opening for the school reform movement to happen. And so the way you combat this school reform movement, this exclusionary schooling model, is not by arguing, it's not by debating, it's by fulfilling the promise and insisting that the promise be kept. And I want to tell you that I believe in my neighbors, I believe in my state, and I believe in my country, and I believe we do have it in ourselves to take care of one another and to take care of the least of these brothers of ours. I believe that we have it in ourselves to provide the type of public education that our promises said we would provide. I'm not ready to give up on us just yet. I refuse to agree to the lesser promises. I will cling to the promises that were made. The Georgia Constitution says this: the provision of an adequate public education for the citizens shall be a primary obligation of the state of Georgia. 3 words: a primary obligation. And so tonight, you and I have a primary obligation too, and that is to demand that these promises be kept. Teachers and students have suffered for years under the burden of increasingly onerous state and federal education policies, a prevailing culture of teacher bashing and student bashing, a relentless campaign to reduce resources while increasing expectations, and we have to remind ourselves tonight that we have the power to determine the future of education in the United States. It's not up to anyone else, it's up to us. When educators and the educated are empowered, reform doesn't happen to them, it happens because of them. And so today, with empowered educators meeting and talking like we're doing right now, with groups like this one and so many others becoming active in so many ways all over the country, we're standing on the threshold of what some have called the education spring. And that sound you hear getting louder is student voice, and it's teacher voice, and it's people pushing back against dumb policies. Education reform, it's not their word anymore. It's our word. They're the corporate reformers, and they don't like that phrase, so we should keep using it. We are the education reformers. We're the ones fighting to improve public education. The status quo is 30 years of shaming and blaming and testing, and then testing some more, and then testing a little bit more on top of that. Defunding our schools, closing neighborhood schools instead of rushing to them with instructional help, facilities repairs, and wraparound services. The status quo is a corporate testing contract worth $500 million in Texas. The status quo is testing company lobbyists roaming the halls in our state houses. The status quo is non-educators and neophytes serving as state education commissioners all over the country. Education chiefs who are political appointees serving parties instead of serving students. The status quo is half-baked algorithms that rate teachers on the test scores of students they never taught. Rampant education privatization. They don't like that word, privatization, either, so we should keep using it as well. They don't want us to say corporate, they don't want us to say privatization, because they know that the people of the United States trust teachers, and they don't trust CEOs. The status quo is voucher schemes that keep getting struck down as unconstitutional, but they keep coming back like zombies. Inequitably funding education is the status quo. Investing fewer educational dollars in poor neighborhoods where the kids need education the most, and investing more in neighborhoods where the kids come from plenty. The status quo is a state attorney general spending state funds to defend a lawsuit against these type of funding abuses, even though he and everyone else knows that it's wrong. We don't support the status quo. We are the reformers. We're here to shake up the educational world, and our movement is only growing. I want to commend you and I want to thank you for being here tonight, listening to these remarks, listening to the remarks that Karen's going to share momentarily. And I want to encourage you to get involved. Get involved in the realm of public opinion. Write letters to the editor, blog, get on Twitter, get on Facebook, defend public education, defend the promise of public education. Every time you see somebody or hear somebody bashing teachers and bashing students and saying things like, graduates of our schools can't find America on a map. I read that today. That was in an article in Newsweek today. It said most Americans can't find America on a map. Patently false. And that kind of stuff happens all the time. We have to have a voice to counter those arguments, because those are politically and ideologically motivated arguments. It doesn't really matter if they're true or not, they're out there. And so I ask you to get out there too. Stand up for public education every day, any way you can, with the pen, with your voice, and by being great teachers in the classroom and caring for your kids. And also, remember, we have to uphold the promise. We have to defend public education by making it be what it can be. Thank you very much.